Welcome to Sanatan Dibbita and I am Padam Gupta. In our series of Swami Vivekanand, his life and legacy, we continue third part, period of intellectual struggle and meeting with the Master. It took, however, a long time and a fierce inner struggle before Narendranath's keen intellect and his inherent spirituality could get integrated into that mighty personality that the world came to know as Swami Vivekanand in later times. For as he grew up into a young man while reading into the Presidency College and even earlier, he came to study and absorb the philosophies of many Western thinkers and the methods and conclusions of modern science. In general, the trends of thought represented by them was mostly agnostic in respect of their attitude towards the spiritual verity. The force of the purely rational approach of the Western science and philosophy profoundly influenced the keen intellect of Narendra and made him question many of the spiritual truths which he had taken for granted in his pre-adolescent life. To add to this intellectual struggle, there was at time the reforms movement represented by the Brahmo Samaj in Bengal. The Hindu social system and the widely accepted conceptions of God, image worship, etc. were questioned by the Brahmos, whose criticism of Hinduism was eloquently placed before the youth by teachers like Keshav Chandra Sen and Shivanath Sastri. Narendra was powerfully influenced by the thought current set in motion by Brahmonism, which advocate the pursuit of Western social ideals and adoptions of the Christian pattern of devotion. The staunch votary of the intellect that he was, he adopted under the influence of these thought currents the attitude of a pure rationalist and agnostic, that openly challenged the Hindu idea of deities and practiced like image worship. But his inherent spiritual nature, however, made him stick to the practice of meditation. However, much the pure intellectualism of Western philosophy and science appealed to him, he was aware of the inherent weakness. He felt that they were attempting to do with the intellect what it cannot do, namely, give a first-hand knowledge of the supreme truth which spiritualists call God. There must be another way of intuitively apprehending Him who is beyond the power of pure rationalism. The question whether God can be directly experienced or not, therefore, became a question of life and death for him. He began his quest for religious leaders of the time, mainly the luminaries of the Brahma Samaj, to know whether they had a direct experience of God. One day, in great excitement, he went to Maharshi Devendranath Tagore with the question, "Have you seen God?" The Maharshi was much surprised but gave no direct answer. He lovingly seated Naren by his side, gave him many good instructions and said, "The characteristics of a yogi are manifest in you. If you practice meditation, you will soon experience the results of it." It was this quest of Narendranath for one who had direct experience of God that brought him finally to Sri Ramakrishna. Naren heard of him first from Principal William Hasty of his college, who mentioned Sri Ramakrishna's name as one who passed into ecstasies while explaining the meaning of ecstasies in one of the Wordsworth poems. He next heard of the great master from a close relative, Ramchandra Datta. It was when Narendra refused to accept attractive proposals of marriage at that time out of his spiritual learning that Ramchandra told him, "If you have a real desire to realize God, then come to the master at Dakshineshwar instead of visiting Brahmo Samaj and other places." Shortly after, he happened to meet the master for the first time at a religious festival at the house of a Surendranath Mitra. where being a good musician, Narendra has been invited to sing religious songs on a day of the Master's visit there. Much pleased with the song, Sri Ramakrishna made inquiries about the young singer. Then he went near Narendra and making a close observation of his physiognomy, he invited him to visit him at Dakshineshwar. This visit took place in November 1881 in the company of Surendranath Mitra, who persuaded Narendra that day to accompany him to Dakshineshwar. What took place at the meeting made it a red letter day in the Narendran life. The master asked him to sit on a mat and sing a devotional song which put him into an ecstasy. After that, the master took him to the side veranda room and closed the door. What happened is described as follows in Swami Sardananda, Sri Ramakrishna, the Great Master, Volume 2, page 825, in Narendran's own word. As soon as he entered the veranda, the master closed the door of the room. I thought he might perhaps give me some instruction in private. But what he said and did was beyond imagination. He suddenly caught hold of my hand and shed profound tears of joy. Addressing me affectionately like one already familiar, he said, "It is proper that you should come so late. Should you not have even once thought how I was waiting for you?" Hearing continuously the ideal talk of the worldly people, my ears are about to be scorched. Without having anyone of whom I can communicate my innermost feeling, I am about to burst. And so he went on raving and weeping. The next moment he stood before me with folded palms and showering on me the regard due to a divine being, bent on saying, "I know, my Lord, you are the ancient Rishi Nara, a part of Narayana, who has incarnated himself this time to remove the miseries and sufferings of humanity." I was absolutely nonplussed and thought, he is, I see, completely insane. Why should he otherwise speak in this strain to me, who is really the son of Vishwanath Datta? However, I kept silent, and the wonderful madman went on speaking whatever he liked. The next moment he asked me to wait there and entered the room, and bringing some butter, candy and sandesh, began to feed me with his own hand. He then caught hold of my hand and said, "Promise you will come again to see me soon." All alone, unable to evade that earnest request, I had to say, "I shall." And then I entered the room with him and sat down beside my companions. I went on observing him closely and could find no trace of madness in his deportment, conversation, or behavior towards others. Impressed by his fine talks and ecstasy, I thought that he was truly a man of reincarnation who has given up all for God and practiced personally what he professed. God, he said, can be seen and spoken with, just as I am seeing you and speaking with you. But who wants to do so? People grieve and shed potfuls of tears at the death of their wives and sons, and behave in the same way for the sake of money or property. But who does so because he cannot realize God? If anyone in this truth equally anxious to see him in calls on him with a longing heart, he certainly reveals himself to him. When I heard these words of him, the impression grew on me that it was not my poetry or imagination couched in the fine gestures, figures of speech that he was expressing like others, preachers or religion, but that he was speaking of something of which he had immediate knowledge, for an attainment which had come to him by really renouncing everything for the sake of God and calling on him with all his mind. Trying to harmonize these words of his with his behavior towards me a little while previously, I remembered the example of the monomanists mentioned by Abercrombie and other English philosophers, and came to the sure conclusion that he belongs to that class. Although I came to that conclusion, I could not forget the greatness of his wonderful reincarnation for God. Speechless, I thought, well, he may be mad, but it is indeed a rare soul alone in the world who could practice such reincarnation. Yes, mad, but how pure, and what renunciation. He is truly worthy of the respect, reverence, and worship by the human heart. Thinking thus, I bowed down at the feet, took leave of him, and returned to Calcutta that day. Discipleship, confrontation, and conversion. The story of Narendra contact with Sri Ramakrishna during the ensuing 4 years is the story of gradual conversion from a critical and cautious observer who held him to be a blessed monomaniac into an absolutely surrendered disciple who was to declare him to be the Avatara Varistha, the greatest of incarnation, and be his chosen apostle to proclaim from a public platform in New York. Today, the name of Sri Ramakrishna Paramahansa is known all over India by his millions of people. Nay, the power of that man has spread beyond India, and if there has been a word of truth, a word of spirituality that I have spoken anywhere in the world, I owe it to my master. Only the mistakes are mine. The conversion took place only after a bitter struggle between Narendra's intellectual pride on the one hand and on the other the personality of Sri Ramakrishna, which was the center of a spiritual power without an ego and the love without a touch of selfishness. The promised visit of Narendra to Dakshineshwar for the second time came to pass about a month later. Describing the happenings on that day, Narendra said, as quoted in Swami Sardananda, Sri Ramakrishna, the Great Master, Volume 2, page 844, no sooner did he see me than he called me joyfully to him and made me sit at one end of his bedstead. I sat down but found him in a strange mood. He spoke something indistinctly to himself, looked steadfastly at me and slowly began coming towards me. I thought another scene of lunacy was going to be enacted. Scarcely had I thought so when he came to me and placed his right foot on my body. And immediately I had a wonderful experience. I saw with my eyes open that all the things in the room together with the walls were rapidly whirling and receding into an unknown region, and my eyes sensed together with the whole universe was, as it were, going to vanish in all-devouring great void. I was then overwhelmed with a terrible fear. I knew that the destruction of the eye sense was death, so I thought that death was before me, very near at hand. Unable to control myself, I cried out loudly, saying, "Ah, what is it you have done to me? I have my parents, you know." Laughing loudly at my words, he touched my chest with his hand and said, "Let it cease now. It need not to be done at once. It will come to pass in course of time." I was amazed to see that extraordinary experience of mine vanish as quickly as it has come when he touched me in that manner, speaking those words. I came to the normal state and saw things inside and outside the room standing still as before. All this took place in a trice, causing a revolution in Narendra's mind. The critical and reflective youth that he was, he tried his best to understand how apparently madman could overwhelm his mind and refashion it like a ball of clay. Could it be mesmerism or hypnotism, of which he had very much? It could not be, because he was proud of his own intelligence and his strong will, and he had moreover gone there not as a submissive tool but as a hostile subject, having the firm conviction that the master was a monomaniac. Besides, after the event, Narendra found the master extremely normal in his behavior, speaking to him lovingly, cracking jokes, and treating him to refreshment as he were a long-standing friend of his. Habituated thou he was to accept a proposition of a person only after, through investigation, reasoning and argumentation. His intellectual ego, however, got blunted that day before this strange person. For how could he sustain the original conclusion that he had made when he thus found him later to be center of power and of unselfish love, the likes of which he had never come across before? So he left that day with the firm determination to investigate and understand the nature and power of that wonderful person. Narendra's third visit to Master took place just within a fortnight. He went that day with the firm resolution not to succumb to the influence of the enigmatic man, egoless and simple like a child, but yet possessing a power that easily subdued even a hostile will. That day the Master took him for a stroll in the neighboring Jadu Malik garden. After walking for a while, the Master along with Narendra sat in the parlour of the vacant house. The Master then passed into an ecstasy, and Narendra said, observing. Suddenly the Master touched him in that ecstatic mood, and Narendra immediately lost all external consciousness in spite of all his resolution. When he came back to his normal consciousness, he found that the Master is stroking his chest with a sweet smile on his face. Narendra has no memory of what had happened in the meanwhile, but in the later days the Master told his disciple as follows about this incident. When Narendra had lost his normal consciousness, I asked him that day many questions such as who he was, where he came from, why he was born, how long he would be here in this world, and so on. Entering into the depths of his being, he gave proper answers to all these questions. These answers of his confirmed what I had thought and seen and known about him in my visions. It is forbidden to reveal all these things, but I have known from all these that on the day when he will know who he is, he will no more remain in this world. He will immediately give up his body through yoga with the strong power of will. Narendra is a great soul perfect in meditation. Sri Ramakrishna, the Great Master, Volume 2, page 845. These experiences produced a profound change in Narendra's attitude towards the Master, whom he had at first dubbed as a monomaniac. He now began to feel that Sri Ramakrishna could be relied upon as his spiritual director, a guru. Till then, Narendra would not accept the concept of the guru, which he looked upon as a selfish subjection to another fallible human being like oneself. Till then, Narendra would not accept the concept of the guru, which he looked upon as a slavish subjection to another fallible human being like oneself. But this change in his attitude did not mean that he was ready to accept everything that the Master taught or practiced. He had all that time a total abhorrence of image worship, and he considered non-dualism, Advaita, as puerile. According to him, monotheism of the type preached by the Brahmas was the true religious ideology. Recognizing the Master's greatness did not mean that he was ready to give up his reasons out views on these matters unless direct experience or reasoning compelled him to do so. Being a keen student of Western philosophy and science, he was well posted with the ideas of thinkers like Hume, Bentham, Darwin, Spencer, Kant, Fichte, Hegel, Schopenhauer, etc. Some of these thinkers stood for valiant atheism, while many others were agnostics, holding that the spiritual principle generally known as the God is unknown and unknowable to the human mind. Narendra's keen intelligence could easily perceive the shortcomings in the attempt of these Western thinkers to understand the ultimate reality, depending purely on the senses of the mind. For what the mind perceives is only certain nerve stimulation in the brain, and even that not directly but mediated by space and time. Beside this intellectual factor, there was his innate spiritual tendency and the influence of the great Master that stood as inhibitions to his yielding to the Western materialistic and aesthetic thought. But under the influence of these thought systems, he gave up the straight path of faith and devotion, as he opposed by doubts about the validity of the traditional beliefs in image worship, the need of a guru, the conceptions of deities, and even the ultimate spiritual monism preached by the Vedanta. But in spite of this agnostic intellectual outlook, there were two qualifications which he instinctively accepted and absolutely necessary for the seeker of truth: the practice of continence and of meditation, and he stuck to the practices. So many an attractive proposal of marriage did he refuse to accept in spite of his father's pressure. As for meditation, he adopted a new method of his own. Anthropomorphism, he thought, is unavoidable, whether you have a for object a God with form or without form. So, as Swami Vivekanand says, he gave up such meditation and prayed to effect, "O God, make me fit to see thy real nature." Then he removed all kinds of thoughts from the mind and keeping it still and motionless like the flame of lamp in a windless space, tried to remain in that state. As a result of doing so for a short time, Narendra's mind, which had all along been restrained, used to merge in itself so deeply that even the consciousness of time in his body disappeared now and then. He spent all nights that way on many occasions. As a result of this, one day, Narendra has an extraordinary vision. Later he described it to his friends in the course of a conversation. He said, "There flowed in my mind a current of serene bliss when I kept it still, devoid of all object. I felt so long, even after the end of meditation, a sort of intoxication under its impulse. So I did not feel inclined to leave the seat and get up immediately. One day when I was sitting in that condition at the end of meditation, I saw the extraordinary figure of a monk appear suddenly from where I do not know and stand before me at a little distance, filling the room with a divine influence. He was in coarse clothes with a kamandal in his hand. His face bore such a calm and serene expression of the inwardness born of indifference to all things that I was amazed and felt drawn towards him. He walked towards me with slow steps and eyes steadfastly fixed on me as if he wanted to say something. But I was seized with fear and could not keep quiet. I got up from my seat, opened the door and walked out of the room with rapid steps. But he returned to the room very soon after. His mind was collected and courage restored, but the figure was not to be seen. He surmised that the form he saw must have been of the Lord Buddha. Narendra, antipathy to Advaita was, however, erased in the end of the impact of the master spiritual power in him. Knowing as he did that Narendra was in future to be the interpreter of Advaitic thought to the modern world, Sri Ramakrishna cured him of these inefficiencies by his spiritual power. Narendra, being a follower of the Brahma Samaj, was a strict follower of monotheism of a dualistic type. Sri Ramakrishna used to ask him to read aloud Advaitic texts like Astavakra Samhita, ostensibly for him to hear, but really to bring Narendra in rapport with those thoughts. One day, after the master had spoken something about Advaita, Narendra got up and went to the veranda where he was seated. Pratapchand Hajra, a very highly intellectual but hypocritical devotee, then began to talk sarcastically about Advaita, saying, "Is it ever possible that this water pot is God? This cup is God? Whatever we see and all of us are God?" Hearing their talk and laughter, the master came out and asked what they were talking about. He then went into ecstasy and touched Narendra. Afterwards, says Swami Vivekanand, Narendra said as follows about the experience he had at the master's touch. "There was a complete revolution in the state of my mind in a moment at the wonderful touch of the master. I was aghast to see actually that there was nothing in the whole universe except God. This inebriation did not at all cease that day. I returned home. It was all the same there. It seems to me that all I saw was He. When I walked along the street and saw a carriage coming along before me, I did not feel inclined as at other times to move away. My hands and feet always remained insensible at that time. While taking food, I ceased to feel that I was eating. It seems as if someone else was taking the meal. I could not escape that intense, intoxicating mood and overwhelming condition for some time. When I came to the normal state, I thought it was the indication of the non-dual knowledge. So what is written in the scripture about it is by no means untrue. Since then, I could not doubt the truth of non-duality." There were However, 2 points on which Naren was inherently in agreement with the Master from the very start. There were the absolute need of renunciation and the indispensability of the meditation for spiritual growth. Hare Krishna. We'll continue this in the next article, the unique relationship between the Master and his disciple.